Every year, billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods flow into India, from solar panels and smartphones to antibiotics and machine parts, quietly powering the country's factories, hospitals, and households. But as the rivalry between Asia's two giants hardens, one question now echoes across boardrooms and ministries alike. If India were to shut its doors to Chinese imports, who would fill the gap? The stakes could not be higher. China accounts for over $113 billion of India's imports, feeding vital sectors like electronics, telecom, and chemicals. A sudden rupture in this supply chain would ripple through every layer of the economy, disrupting production, inflating prices, and testing India's dream of self-reliance. Behind the rhetoric of Atmanirbhar Bharat lies a hard truth. While India's manufacturing ambitions have grown, much of its industrial engine still runs on Chinese parts. From pharmaceuticals that depend on Chinese APIs to solar energy projects reliant on Chinese panels, the dependency runs deep. Domestic manufacturing and Southeast Asian partners like Vietnam or Malaysia could plug some gaps, but none can fully replace China's scale and cost advantage. Even when goods shift away from Chinese shores, many of their components still originate there, a reminder that China's grip on the global supply chain is not easily undone. For India, the path forward may not be about isolation, but insulation, reducing vulnerabilities without breaking the chain entirely. De-risking, not decoupling, may prove the smarter strategy in a world where every product, directly or indirectly, still bears the imprint of China's manufacturing might. The idea of shutting the door on Chinese imports is rooted less in economics and more in geopolitics. Ever since the Galwan Valley clash of 2020, India has been driven by a dual mission: to de-risk its supply chains and to strengthen domestic self-reliance. Programs like Atmanirbhar Bharat and the Production-Linked Incentive (PLI) scheme, worth over 1.97 lakh crore rupees, $26 billion, have been designed to reduce dependence on foreign imports and stimulate domestic manufacturing in sectors such as electronics, mobile phones, and pharmaceuticals. But the critical question remains: can India afford to unplug from China? And if so, who steps in to fill the void? The immediate impact of such a shutdown would be economic whiplash. Take pharmaceuticals, one of India's proudest export success stories. The country is often called the pharmacy of the world, but its engine runs on Chinese raw materials, particularly active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. Nearly 70% of India's APIs come from China. A full import ban would bring large sections of the drug manufacturing industry to a standstill, triggering shortages both at home and abroad. Likewise, in solar power, India's dependence is even more acute. Over 80% of solar components used in India's renewable energy projects come from China. When India raised customs duties on Chinese solar modules in 2022 and 2023, installation rates slowed sharply. A complete ban would raise project costs, delay the clean energy transition, and risk derailing India's climate goals. Consumers would not be spared either. Chinese imports dominate the low to mid-price segments in electronics, appliances, and household goods, the very markets that millions of Indian families rely on. Without these imports, prices would spike across the board. A middle-class family shopping for a smartphone or television would suddenly face fewer choices at significantly higher prices. For many Indian manufacturers, the loss of cheap Chinese components would also mean higher input costs, eroding competitiveness and forcing them to either raise prices or shut down production. Inflation, already a political flashpoint, would surge. If not China, then who? The answer lies in a combination of domestic resilience and regional substitution, neither of which can happen overnight. On the domestic front, India's Atmanirbhar Bharat drive has made some notable progress. The mobile phone industry is a standout example. Once entirely dependent on imports, India is now the second largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world, thanks to strong government incentives under the PLI scheme. Yet, even this success story carries an asterisk. The vast majority of components that go into these phones, from circuit boards to camera modules, still come from China. A study comparing US and Chinese goods found that American products were up to 50% costlier in 92% of categories, underlining just how difficult and expensive it is to replace Chinese supply chains. Beyond India's borders, Southeast Asia offers partial solutions. Countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia have emerged as attractive alternatives under the China Plus One strategy, a global movement by multinationals to diversify manufacturing bases without completely abandoning China. Vietnam has been the biggest beneficiary of the US-China trade war, becoming a hub for textiles, footwear, and consumer electronics. It could, in theory, fill some of the gaps in India's import basket. However, Vietnam's economy is far too small to absorb even a fraction of China's production scale. Its wages are rising, its logistics networks are stretched, and it still relies heavily on importing intermediate goods, often from China itself, to assemble final products. In short, trading with Vietnam might still mean trading indirectly with China. Other regional players like Thailand and Malaysia are better equipped in specific sectors, such as semiconductors, automotive components, and high-end electronics. Thailand, for instance, is Southeast Asia's largest automotive manufacturer, and Malaysia is a critical node in the global semiconductor supply chain. Both could help India diversify imports in precision manufacturing and machinery. But scaling up these relationships takes time, years of trade negotiations, infrastructure alignment, and standardization. Meanwhile, countries like South Korea and Japan offer technologically advanced but high-cost alternatives, while Turkey and Mexico present niche opportunities in textiles, automobiles, and consumer goods. However, importing from these distant markets would mean longer lead times and higher logistics costs, a poor substitute for the speed and affordability that Chinese suppliers currently provide. The real pain point lies not in finished goods, but in intermediate goods and strategic materials. For example, rare earth magnets, essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and defense equipment, are almost entirely dominated by China, which controls around 90% of global production. India imported 870 tons of rare earth magnets, worth 306 crore rupees in FY25. These magnets are critical to the functioning of India's clean energy and electronics industries. Replacing them would not only be expensive, but geopolitically complex, as China has begun attaching political strings to their export, including asking for guarantees that they won't be redirected to US markets. Even if India could switch suppliers for finished goods, toys, textiles, or electronics, replacing intermediate goods would be far more difficult. These components form the invisible backbone of India's manufacturing ecosystem. A disruption at this level would paralyze production across multiple sectors. It's why even countries that have successfully replaced China in exports, such as Vietnam or Indonesia, continue to import Chinese components to keep their factories running. The global supply chain, in other words, still runs through Beijing. A complete decoupling from Chinese imports would therefore be more than an economic experiment. It would be an economic shock. The vacuum would likely be filled by a patchwork of domestic production, ASEAN-based re-exports, and expensive imports from developed economies. The result would be higher prices, slower growth, and strained public finances. As one analyst put it succinctly, you can move supply chains, but you can't move ecosystems. The smarter path for India lies not in decoupling, but in de-risking. Instead of closing the door entirely, India can focus on insulating key strategic sectors: pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, rare earths, while maintaining trade in non-sensitive, low-cost goods. This means doubling down on PLI schemes, improving infrastructure, and investing in research that makes Indian manufacturing globally competitive. As one trade expert remarked, completely banning Chinese imports is neither possible nor desirable. Trade forms the bedrock of economic growth, technological advancement, and peaceful coexistence among nations. If India truly wants to reduce dependence on China, it must think beyond bans and tariffs. It must build ecosystems, suppliers, logistics, research, and capital that can compete on cost, quality, and scale. Until then, the uncomfortable truth is that even if India shuts the door on China, much of what comes through the window may still have been made there.